Well, it's not no wipe from the building. It's just
the ability to get small bandwidth.
no, it's just the guest wireless area.
Really? Oh, okay.
And if they increase the guest wireless area for this facility, they have to do it for all the facilities in the future. Because they can't realize that New York is bigger than Iowa. Who wants to be first? Start right here?
Sure.
Okay.
It's politically.
There's additional bits on there that beyond Merck's example stuff.
Okay.
So if you grab those, you might get a little confused. But example one, my class and my registration. Those are the three for this talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. I'm having trouble. I can't run my local server. I'm getting a J error.
I remember.
You can turn off. Turn off.
I'll start here and just we'll pass it back.
You're running a local server. Sorry. No, it's telling him he's turning errors. So turn off errors in the
No, error reporting. That's your reporting team, right?
That's what I say. Yeah, you turn off error reports, like display all errors off the session.
Okay.
Is it working?
Okay. I'll start it. Peter will explain what they're into open source. But looking from the other standpoint, if people want to run open source,
Let's just go straight on.
they want to run a Microsoft server. It doesn't make a chance to go and excuse their own server. I guess he's okay. So they want it to run. They also want Joomla. They support Joomla that will run on MS SQL.
Are you using this?
Oh, they have a port on there too. It'll run on MS SQL?
Yes.
Oh.
Download the files.
And Joomla is the #1 open source download on their tool site, which is why they want support. All right.
I guess it's not too big of a difference back to just the way you connect to the data.
Right. The only trouble comes if people who write components don't follow rules. And
So they try to use the MySQL connect instead of.
Okay. Well, there are people who write SQL commands into the components rather than use the query model, query library.
Okay, so let's get started with the first example. All your plugins are going to have your standard XML file that pretty similar across any extension. It just means the has some information about the author and all that kind of stuff. And then the important part is the name is really important, and it's in the format. Whoa!
Oh,
Don't try this at home.
So it's in the format PLG underscore, and then content is the type, is the category, the type of plugin event. So that would be content, system, authenticate, and so on, right? And then the name of the plugin itself. In this case, example 1. Okay, so that's critical. Everybody got that? So PLG underscore, then the event type, and then the name of the plugin. And then down in the files here, this matches that guy, and then it also matches the file name there. Okay. And then here you just name your files. Now, how many files do we have? We got this file, which you don't have to name because it knows about itself, and we got an index HTML just for a good measure. We got one file, right? Now, maybe in a real life example, you'd have a language file too. We'll show you that in another example. But we got one file here, folks. Now let's look at that. Let's look at that file. This file is mostly comments. So if you've done any Joomla programming at all, you know, everybody know what this guy does? Okay. This is just a simple security check to make sure that you're running inside Joomla and not trying to execute a file on its own. Okay? So it's just checking, this is a PHP constant that we defined when we first initiate Joomla. So we're just checking that that constant's defined. If it's not, we kill the program.
Who do you send it to?
So it's just this is standard on virtually every PHP program in the system. Then this guy here is important. This loads the library class from the folder libraries Joomla plugin / plugin.php. And again, every plugin needs that because that's what that program is. That class is required to run plugins. Okay, so this stuff is just standard on anything, any plugin. Then here we define the class, and again, the name is critical. Okay? Again, it should look familiar. PLG, the type of event, and then the name of the plugin. Okay? This time without the underscores, but it's the same thing. And we extend the JPlugin class, which is what we imported up here. Okay? So this is just standard for any plugin. Yeah.
What prevents collisions if you have two plugins with the same name from two different
Well, it's a
places?
good question, and there isn't anything, so that's why you want to namespace your plugin. Okay, this isn't a good. I didn't do that here, but you normally would want to use like your URL or and it's the same issue. Like if you're going to publish something on the JED, you have the same issue, right? You want to namespace it, so you would want to use like your URL name or something to make it unique, so that you have a pretty good. That's a real good question. Okay.
Yeah. So since 1.5, but is there anything else specifically about this that you have to do for versions?
No. I mean, this example is for 1.7, but actually there wasn't that much that changed in plugins between 1.5 and 1.6. Yes?
How with the naming of plugin, does it look your YAML casing over from the management?
You know, I don't think the case, PHP is not case sensitive on class names, so it's just to make it readable.
Okay.
Doesn't matter, the program doesn't care. Okay, so that's just the housekeeping to set up the class. Now, for those of you who are not experienced programmers, especially with object-oriented programming, one thing that you need to be aware of when you're looking at Joomla programs in general is basically PHP programs in Joomla are going to fall into two kind of categories. One is a program like this that declares a class, and then the other is what we would call a script that just actually executes lines of code. And the important distinction there is that something like this, where we just are declaring a class, when this program is included or loaded in the current execution cycle, nothing happens other than it's defined in memory now. We've got a new kind of object that our computer knows about. But nothing is actually executed immediately in the execution. You know, nothing changes in the execution cycle when a file like this is loaded, because all we're doing is defining a class. Okay, as opposed to something like a layout or an index PHP file, which is not defining class, which is just a series of PHP commands. Those get executed immediately as soon as you include those or load those. okay? So at the point that this is loaded, nothing is happening other than we're defining a class and one or more methods, okay? Okay, so now we get to the actual code that's going to do something, okay? All of that other stuff is just housekeeping, getting it ready to go, and it's pretty much it's the same for any plugin, okay? So we have public function, and then this should look familiar, right? This is an event that that's defined for the content. In this case, on content before save, and this event is fired just before we save a content item. Pretty reasonably intuitive. Okay. Now, this is the other important thing. Remember I said that there were kind of two things you needed to know about. One is, where am I? And then the other one is, what have I got to work with here, right? So this is where am I, and this is what I've got to work with here. And in the wiki document, or in the examples, you can see, and it should be documented up here as well, every event is going to pass different things. When we create an event in Joomla, we try to think, well, what's somebody going to be doing with this event? So what are the objects that they're going to need? What's the information they're going to need that we want to have access to, right? So in this case, we're about to save a content item. So we need to know the context. Where the heck are we? And then here we're passing it the article, and then we're passing it. Is it a Boolean flag? Is it new or not? Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And these are fixed for you. You have to include these. These are you don't have any choice over these. This is decided when the person codes the event. When the dispatcher calls the event, these are determined. So you have to name these arguments even if you're not going to use them. Okay. So here, what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do, like I mentioned before, is are we where I think we ought to be? Are we somewhere that I'm supposed to do? So if we're not in content at an article, I'm not going to, I don't know, I don't have anything to do. So we're only going to do this stuff if we're in there. Okay. Then the other thing is, in this example, we're going to add a signature to the end of the article automatically. Okay. Well, I don't want to do that if I'm editing an article, right? I only want to do that one time. So I only want to do that if is new is true. Right? Otherwise, every time I edit the article, I get another signature. Right? So basically, if both of those conditions are true, then I'm actually going to do some work. Otherwise, I'm just going to come down here and return true. Okay? And then all I have to do is I get the app, I get the user name because I want to put my name in the signature, and here I'm just assuming, for simplicity's sake, I'm assuming I don't have anything after the intro text, so I'm just adding it to the end of the intro text. Right? So I really have 3 or 4 lines of code, I guess, to do that. And now there's a little bit of a trick here, which is that this context is only for the back end. So if you were with this code here, if you were to go in and edit an article from the front end, you wouldn't get the signature. There's a different context on the front end. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head.
What would it be?
What's that?
What would it be?
I think it's a form. I think it's content.form. I can't remember for sure. I had a different version. I must have gotten the version.
How would you find the answer to questions like that?
Well, that's a good question. There's a couple ways you could do it. I mean, one way would be to look at the code where the dispatcher's called if you look at the code for the where an article is saved, it'll set the context there. That would be one way. Or maybe a simpler way would be to just if you have a debugger, go in here and debug, or if you don't have a debugger, just go in here and bar dump the context and kill the program, and it will tell you exactly what the context was at that point. Does that make sense? I can do that real quick if you want, but if you understand it, we don't need to.
Always glad to see you.
What's that?
Always glad to see you.
Okay. Let's just try that. Let's see here.